history speeds up. Nothing about the industrial technologies the British developed was designed to remain purely British. Just as the previous technologies of the sedentary agriculture, water, wind, and deep water eras diffused outward, so too did the industrial techs of textiles, steam, steel, electricity, and fertilizer. Because much of the work on developing and operationalizing these new techs had already been done, their application in new lands was much faster, which also meant their impacts upon demographic structures were faster. The second major country to experience the mass transformation of industrialization was Germany. In the century leading up to World War I in 1914, Germany rapidly evolved from a shattered, pre-industrial, guild-based economic system, which was often preyed upon by its neighbors, to a united industrial, economic, technological, and military powerhouse that had in shockingly short order defeated Denmark, Austria, and France. The German population, like the British population before it, nearly tripled due to the industrialization and urbanization process. The German population, like the British population before it, aged due to lower mortality rates. The German population, like the British population before it, saw its birth rates plummet. But because the German population, unlike the British population before it, could follow a path blazed by others, the entire process from tip to tail occurred in just 4 generations. The sheer speed of the German industrialization process, combined with the German geography, contributed to the traumatic horrors of the world wars. Germans lacked an overseas empire to absorb their surplus populations. Even at its pre-World War I peak, Germany just wasn't that big. A bit smaller than Montana plus Idaho, and half the territory is too rugged to be easily developed. Once industrial techs enabled the German population to expand, Germans quickly discovered they had nowhere to expand into, part and parcel of why Hitler was so obsessed with munching on the horizon. Throughout the British and German experiences, 3 additional and completely unrelated issues intensified the urbanization trends that industrialization launched. First was the rise of the women's rights movement. At its core, the women's rights movement didn't really gain traction until the European revolutions of 1848. The technologies of the industrial era spawned massive economic and political upheaval across Europe, culminating in a series of intense civil wars as old political and social structures within and across countries struggled to contain unfamiliar pressures. The new technologies all had one thing in common: they required people, and lots of them. Some of the new techs, like the new assembly lines, required largely unskilled labor. Others, such as petrochemicals, demanded people who really knew what they were doing because, explosions. But for all classes of labor, the new demand drove labor costs up. Culture and ethics and morality aside, whether it was women looking after the farm as the men took factory jobs in town, or the women themselves taking positions at the new industrial textile factories where they could easily earn more than double the income of a strapping lad back on the farm, there was now an economic case for women to be mistresses of their own lives. In traditional societies, women tend to be wed to a very specific physical location: farm and home. If there is a famine or war, it is the men who venture forth to scrounge or battle, while the women remain behind to care for the household. Such restrictions ensured women were typically available. As such, in pre-industrial societies, it was very common for a woman to bear more than 6 children during the course of her life. But break the link to the household and agriculture. Enable mass female education. Allow women to earn their own income. Even women desiring large families quickly discovered that careers tend to crowd out other items on their to-do list, in part because, regardless of intent, spending a few dozen hours a week at a factory job reduces the opportunities for pregnancy. The second factor encouraging a collapsing birth rate sits at the intersection of women's rights and industrial technologies: birth control. In the days before the Industrial Revolution, the most reliable method of birth control was good timing. Industrialization expanded the options list. In 1845, the US government awarded a patent for rubber vulcanization to Charles Goodyear. Yes, that Goodyear, which set industry on the path to making cheap, reliable condoms. Combine such advances with the early women's rights movements, and the political and economic stars of the fairer sex began their long rise, but at the cost of overall fertility rates. The third incidental factor, depressing birth rates, can be laid at the feet of the Americans' grand plan for their post-World War II international order. The urbanization trend was already going full steam before the World Wars blasted the old system apart. But with the onset of the free trade order, the world's most advanced economies, most notably Western Europe and Japan, were no longer burdened with a world of constant high-velocity war. Countries could focus on what they did best, or at least what they wanted to do best. And the security placidity of the order enabled them to import food from half a world away. The very nature of the Bretton Woods globalization process depressed birth rates by squeezing the agricultural sector across the industrialized world. In the pre-free trade world, importing food in mass was rarely a viable large-scale option. That drove government calculations both economic and strategic. Cloudy, short summer Germany is hardly known for its rich agricultural system, but in the general melee that was pre-1945 Europe, the Germans had no choice but to wring out as much crappy food from their crappy land as was required for the survival of the state. Ugh, sauerkraut. Great Britain, known for its food only because the food is so bad, was able to take a different road only because the place is an island. By the late 19th century, the imperial system enabled the Brits to source their food from colonies far removed from Europe. Such sourcing options enabled the Brits to not only focus their energies on the manufacturing side of the Industrial Revolution, but also gain the benefits from a globe-spanning empire to boot. The order turned this system inside out. By enforcing global security, shattering the empires, opening the world to trade, and enabling the spread of the agricultural technologies of the Industrial Revolution, the Americans inadvertently introduced the world to global agriculture. Parts of the old imperial networks could now maximize output